Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. Before reciting the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nastapraya Shabadreshu Nityam Bhagavate Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadanti Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagratatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurāṅgi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from the second canto of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 3, Pure Devotional Service, the Change in Heart. Atab Abidehi Anga Manonukalam Atabi Dehi Anga Mano Nukulam Atabi Dehi Anga Mano Nukulam Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Yadaha Vyayasakiratma Vidya Yadaha Vyasakiratma Vidya Visharado Nrip Apatim Sadhu Prishtaha Visharado Nripatim Sadhu Prishtaha Atabi De Hyangamano Nukulam Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Yadaha Vyasakiratma Vidya Visharado Niptatim Sadhu Prishtaha. Okay, please. Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Yadaha Vyasakiratma Vidya Visharado Nripatim Sadhu Prishtaha Sadhu Prishtaha Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Yadaha Vyasakiratma Vidya Visharado Niptatim Sadhu Prishtaha Abhidehi Anga Manonukulam Prabhashase Bhāgavata Pradhanaha Yadaha Vyasakiratma Vidya Visharado Niptatim Sadhu Prishtaha atabideyanga manonukulam prabhashase bhagavata pradhanaha Yadahavya sakiratma vidya Vishadado niptatim sadhu prishtaha Ata. Therefore, Abidehi, please explain. Anga, O Sutta Goswami, Mana, mind, Anukulam, favorable to our mentality. Prabhashase, you do speak. Bhagavata, the great devotee. Pradhanaha, the chief. Yat aha, what he spoke. Vyasakihi, Shukadev Goswami. Atma Vidya, transcendental knowledge. Visharadaha, expert. Nripatim, unto the king. Sadhu, very good. Prishtaha, being asked. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. O Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds. Please therefore explain this to us as it was spoken by the great devotee Shukadev Goswami, who is very expert in transcendental knowledge and who spoke to Maharaj Parikshit upon being asked. O Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds. Please therefore explain this to us as it was spoken by the great devotee Shukadev Goswami, who is very expert in transcendental knowledge and who spoke to Maharaj Parikshit upon being asked. Purport. Knowledge explained by the previous Acharya like Shukadev Goswami and followed by the next like Sutta Goswami is always powerful transcendental knowledge and therefore is penetrating and useful to all submissive students. Thus, in the Bhaktivedanta purports of the second canto, third chapter of the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam entitled Pure Devotional Service, the Change in Heart. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate giram yat kripatam aham vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Paramanandamaram Shri Chaitanya Ishram Hariom Tat Sat. So we're in the third chapter of the second canto, and what has been going on in the Bhagavatam so far, in the second chapter, Shukadev Goswami is answering one of the questions of Parikshit Maharaj. What is the duty of a man about to die? Because as we all know, I guess I should beg before speaking, the majority of the audience are my great superiors. So please forgive me if I say anything wrong, and please bless me to advance in devotional service. Thank you for tolerating. I beg forgiveness. Okay, so in chapter 2, he's answering the question of what should a man do at the time of death. At the time, none of the sages knew how to answer Parikshit Maharaj's questions until Shukadev came, and in his answer, he gave two different kind of paths that someone at the time of death could follow. One was more for the yogi or the jnani, someone who couldn't really take to devotional service. So it's this very gradual yoga process. You have to do a lot of purification of the body. At the time of death, you have to somehow close up the different gates, and hopefully you can raise your life air up through the different chakras, and hopefully it goes out the top of your head, and then if it does, then you'll be able to eventually make your way all the way, till you're liberated. Going through all these different phases, all the way up to Satyaloka. But if you have material desires, then you're stuck with your material mind. Like the body will be finished at the time of death, but the mind is not finished until the time of liberation. So if you have material desires, you'll be stuck in the material world. And then he goes on to describe the process of hearing and chanting and remembering and glorifying the pastimes of the Lord, or in other words, devotional service, bhakti. Then kind of in this chapter, he segues back into, so material desires. So he lists all these different kind of demigods which you can worship to supposedly fulfill your material desires. And he pretty much covers all the bases there. That's an extensive list. But then he concludes, if you have a desire, you should still worship Krishna. Because Krishna, he's the controller, Ishvaram Parama Krishna. He's the controller of all these demigods. He can easily bestow whatever a demigod can bestow. And in fact, he's the one that is actually giving the demigod the power to bestow their benediction, and he's the one who's giving the worshipper of the demigod the faith that they need to actually engage in the worship. So that way he's kind of on both sides, all helping him. But that being said, one should directly go to Krishna. And actually Krishna, what he'll do is he's very intelligent with his devotees. He understands that material desires are bad for the devotee, and that the devotee wants to ultimately be with him, but they can't be with him with material desires. And so he fulfills those desires in such a way that the devotee will just be more attached to him and will forget about asking for more material desires. And so all these karmakandi demigod worshippers and everyone, they can ultimately attain the status of becoming a devotee of Krishna through the association of devotees. So that was the conversation between Shukadeva and Parikshit Maharaj. Now at the end of this chapter 3, it's switching, or I guess like the last half you could say, it switches back to our, the whole Bhagavatam is like, a story within a story within a story, a narrative within the narrative. So we have Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami discussing on the bank of the Ganges when Parikshit Maharaj had 7 days left to live. So that's like the basic Bhagavatam, like the you could say the first narrative. But then later, one of the audience members, Sutta Goswami, heard the Bhagavatam and then presented that to the sages at Naimisaranya sometime later. And the sages at Naimisaranya were performing 1,000-year sacrifice to help counteract the effects of Kali Yuga. And there, Shaunak Rishi was like the head of those sages, and he was asking Sutta Goswami some similar questions. And so Sutta Goswami presented the Bhagavatam. So now Shaunak Rishi is trying to fire up Sutta Goswami to speak more. So he's saying, what further did Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadeva say? Because when there's a speaker and there's a hearer, it's like a relationship, or like, in a more mundane concept. Like, if there's a band performing, there's like an audience, and there's a performer and there's a listener. So if the listeners are like engaged by the performer and they like it, they show that, and there's a reciprocation. The performer also wants to do more. Like when you're doing Harinam, it's much more ecstatic and easy to take, at least for the mind, when everyone out there is like getting along with it. Like if you're in Times Square and Harinam Ruchi's there and it's like a fired up tune, and then there's just this big circle of people that they start dancing, it makes it much easier to chant Krishna's names and dance and do that kind of devotional service. Whereas sometimes it's difficult. So there's this reciprocation between the speaker and the audience. And so many times in the Bhagavatam you'll see sometimes where Shukadeva Goswami will ask a question to Parikshit Maharaj just to make sure that he's like catching up to where he is at, they're on the same level. And then Parikshit Maharaj will many times ask different questions to get clarification. So there's like, it's not just like, oh, I'm speaking to a wall, or something like that, that the speaker gets encouraged by how they reciprocate with the audience. And so what's happening is he says, well, Shonaka Rishi concludes, well, they must be speaking Harikatha, because anyone else doing anything else in their day that aren't absorbed in Harikatha, are the rising and the setting of the sun is just taking away their life. And then he gives so many nice similes of comparisons of their different limbs to like different animals. Like in other words, people who don't hear Harikatha, who don't engage in devotional service, they're just the same as animals. And can anyone in these last few days, we've been going through those verses, so can we remember any of those like nice similes of like, I didn't write any down, I'm not looking at anything right now, so Maharaj.
Well, of course, there's that verse, dogs, hogs, camels, and asses.
Dogs, hogs, camels, and asses, wow.
So, dogs are, as Prabhupada puts it, creatures who faithfully serve for almost no reward. So he's suggesting that many people work for some business and they work enormous long hours and they get some negligible pay.
Yeah. Or one just came to me, like, do the blacksmith bellows not breathe? Do like the animals not pass semen or something like that? Like if people just breathing and engaging in life only for the sake of sex, it's like they're just a dull animal, or even duller, like it's just an object like the bellows of a blacksmith. Anyone else? Has anything come to mind?
The eyes that don't look at the nature, like the eyes
Yeah. Eyes in the peacock feather are like fake eyes, even though they're very beautiful. There's no substance, nothing living. So after all these, now this is the final verse of the chapter, and then we segue back into Shukadev and Parikshit continuing their Harikatha. And Shonaka Rishi is saying, "Oh, Sutta Goswami, your words are so pleasing to our minds. Mana anukulam, favorable to our mentality." That means he's expressing, if the audience is like clapping, that means they like the whatever, or there's a standing ovation, they really liked it. So this is similar, Shonaka Rishi is trying to tell Sutta Goswami that whatever he's been saying, everyone has been really liking, so he should keep saying it. And then he's and actually in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's translation, it's said a little bit differently. Instead of saying, Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds, in his translation, the Sanskrit is rendered in such a way that he's asking, oh, Sutta Goswami, please speak according to your inclination. And so it may seem like there's a contradiction, but actually, either way, for the speaker or for the hearer, whatever is happening is transcendental and on a very blissful platform. Like there's that famous verse, Mat chitta mat gata prana bodhayanta parasparam katayantash jamam nityam tushanti cha ramanti cha. So the pure devotees, or actually it doesn't matter if they're pure or not, any devotees who are constantly engaging in discussing the different kata or topics about Krishna, they experience tushanti, great satisfaction, and ramanti, great bliss, from always discussing that. So the speaker will have bliss, the audience will have bliss, and so if Sutta Goswami speaks something according to his inclination, because he's a pure devotee, he's going to speak something that's going to be also blissful and pleasing to the mind of everyone else. Which that's like the spiritual master's their expertise in this verse, it's saying Shukadev Goswami is Atma Vidya Visharda. He's expert in transcendental knowledge. So one way that this expertise is shown is the ability, like a good teacher, if they actually know something, they can communicate it and get someone else to know that. That's that's just the definition of a teacher. And so part of explaining something pleasing to someone's mind and getting them to understand it, that's really the whole process of transcendental knowledge, how it goes from one soul to the other. Like Prabhupada's praying, most of the population here is covered by the material modes of ignorance and passion. Absorbed in material life, they think themselves very happy and satisfied. This is in the famous Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam Dharma poem. So he's on the Boston Harbor, and he's just wondering how will people accept this message. He's just seeing all the Americans engaged in all the 4 pillars of sinful life. They have like hardly a trace of any kind of piety or any ability to understand something like this. So he's praying to Krishna. Therefore, they have no taste for this message of Vasudeva. I don't know how they'll be able to understand it, but I know your causeless mercy can make everything possible. Make my words fit for their understanding. So the duty of the spiritual master to the disciple is to get the disciple to understand. But then obviously the duty also lies with the disciple. Tadvidi pranipatina paripashnena sevaya ubadekshite jnanam jnaninas tattva darshina. There needs to be both, submission to the spiritual master as well as relevant inquiries. There can't simply just be blind following or blind submission. Like if we're in the Bhagavatam class, we can hear it, and it's purifying. It's punya shravana kirtana. Even just hearing it, even if you hear it in a different language, if they're just speaking Sanskrit, like we always repeat the Sanskrit verse at the start. Some people may question, if you don't understand Sanskrit and we're not necessarily trying to learn Sanskrit, then why bother? Well, one thing is it's actually what was spoken, and so that's a very incredible thing to be able to be a part of. But it's completely purifying to the consciousness on a very deep and subtle level just to hear that. That's one thing. But then there's also getting into our minds so we can actually really understand it. And so for that, it requires proper inquiries. Sometimes when there's a lot of new people or you're preaching, definitely this happens a lot. Like if you're distributing books, or sometimes people will just come up, they'll ask the most absurd inquiries. And it's an absurd inquiry is most of the time a sign of someone that's not properly submissive. Like there's that famous story, the Prabhupada memories. Prabhupada is on this big pandal, and he was talking about this verse, Tad Vidi Pranipatina, Bhagavad Gita 4:34, and the necessity of how to get transcendental knowledge. That's what chapter 4 is about. You can do all these different sacrifices, but they ultimately lead to transcendental knowledge. And the real method for that is surrendering unto the Tattvadarshi, the one who actually knows the truth. And so Prabhupada's he's stressing that you need to be submissive and you need to do proper inquiries. And so with that, he brings some questions, and then someone asked a question, and it was very unsubmissive. It had nothing really to do with the class. It was just someone that wanted to make either a political point, or they're like an atheist, or they wanted to just cause some disturbance. And you say the Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago. What is your proof? I say this, blah blah blah. And then Prabhupada he's like, well, how do you get knowledge? And he actually invited the guy on stage, and they ended up having a verbal back and forth, and it ended up becoming yelling. And it just like bewildered a lot of the devotees, and a lot of people in the crowd like were really disturbed by it. And they got up and they're like, because most people have this idea that, oh, a sadhu is supposed to be so happy and peaceful, and what is this Prabhupada doing, yelling like this? And they left. But Prabhupada is actually perfectly showcasing his point he was making the whole class. It was like the cherry on top. He nailed it, at least for those who were trying to perceive it. Because this person wasn't being submissive, and therefore the spiritual master couldn't give them information at all. And so that's a secret even in mundane knowledge. If you give the teacher the apple, then they're gonna try harder to help you learn. And it's especially important and necessary in spiritual matters that we engage in devotional service, that we serve the spiritual master, we follow the spiritual master's instructions. Then with that, then our consciousness will be in the right place to be able to ask the proper inquiries, and then we'll actually be able to understand what we're hearing, and then that understanding will come. We can actually change our lives. We can get realizations, because with a change in activity, then you perform the activity, you actually realize that what you're hearing was true, so you have more faith in it, and so on and so forth, all the way up to then we see Krishna face to face, and we have prema. That's the process. And there's this story that I've heard. This one Gaudiya Mat, someone was asking a question. This older Mataji said, "Oh, I've been coming to the temple for so many years, but why don't I feel any symptoms of bhakti?" And he said, "Okay, this is a good question. You come back tomorrow, and we'll invite more people, and then we'll answer it." And so he ended up explaining that. So you've been coming to the temple, every day for so long, and maybe you've even been hearing, but you haven't really been understanding, the basic point. The first point that we try to tell everyone is, oh, you're a servant of Krishna. So if we say that, then someone actually has to understand that and act in that way, like they're a servant of Krishna. So not that, you just come and try to take something from the temple, or just sit down and something will magically happen. Even just coming to the temple will get one some pious sukriti that will fructify at some later point, but there's different speeds at which one can accelerate to and make advancement. And so the more solid basis we have in our understanding of our relationship with Krishna, the more solid basis we can actually have for the process of devotional service. If we don't clearly understand that we're a servant of Krishna, that we're supposed to be submissive to him, and there's a whole line of disciplic succession, that if we serve the current link, then we can actually be put into that whole process and attain the goal. And then we can relish bliss at every moment, like these devotees here. So that's why it's important to have someone, a very expert spiritual master. This disciplic succession is, evam parampara praptam. Prabhupada one time said, this is Vedic technology. Someone who's really obsessed with all these Viman Shastras, maybe Hitler was researching the Viman Shastras, and they say he built the V8 rocket. The V is for the Vimana, and so many people are, if you on the History Channel, they have this thing called Ancient Aliens shows, and they have all this people like to research all this stuff and think it's so cool, alien technology, wow. And so they were trying to question Prabhupada. Oh, this is a far out, Eastern sadhu person. Let me just ask him about this stuff. Is there any cool technology? Prabhupada just, there definitely is a lot of cool stuff, but Prabhupada cut it to the point. Parampara is the Vedic technology. That's the information transfer system. And it works from this, like I've been saying, in a generic way, the submission and the inquiry, but it also works because it's transcendental knowledge. It's not just knowledge, it's transcendental knowledge. It works by the supreme potency of Krishna. Prabhupada's praying, you're the supreme mystic, so you please help me make them understand. And in this regard, there's another nice pastime. This one Mataji she first started just coming to hear Prabhupada, but she couldn't understand his Bengali accent. she would go and just have no idea even what was being said. And I think all of us, or most of us, or at least me, when we first came in contact with Christian consciousness, we didn't really have an idea of what was being said. I read the Bhagavad Gita my first 6 months in Christian consciousness, and the only thing I remember that illicit sex was something you weren't supposed to do. That was the only thing, and all the other points, I remember reading chapter 13 and literally just reading the page and being like, what the heck did I just read? Like, oh well, let's go. It was really hard to understand. Nature, enjoyer, and consciousness in the field, and this and that. Like, what the heck is all these things? I couldn't put it together, and so it can be hard to understand. But by Krishna's mercy, by his mystic potency, somehow he can arrange it. So actually, later she ended up taking initiation, or surrendering in her heart, like, yes, okay, this is what I do. This is my spiritual master. And then the next time she heard Prabhupada, everything came completely clearly. She could understand what he was saying. And so that's kind of like Krishna is guiding everything, so he can also guide us to understand about him. And that's actually one of his greatest glories. So this parampara, Prabhupada saying the purport, explained by the previous acharya and then followed by the next, is always potent and powerful, and therefore penetrating and useful to submissive students. So each member of the disciplic succession, if you have this wonderful thing that you're trying to see, they're like a lens in a telescope, which each progressive lens can extend who can actually, the distance away from which you can see that beautiful thing. And so, the famous third verse in the Bhagavatam, Nigaba kapalatur galitam phalam sukha mukadamrita drava samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muharaho rasika bhuvi bhavaka. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the mature fruit of the desired tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So what this is describing, at least one thing that this is describing, is that Vyasadeva, he was the original compiler and the writer, the author of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So that's the first narrative. But then Shukadeva Goswami, who in his mother's womb decided to stay there for 16 years because he didn't want to engage at all with the external material world. He didn't want to get into Maya. He was completely liberated. He heard some of these verses, and that made him come back to Vyasadeva to really understand and hear more. So he was completely liberated from the three modes of material nature. He didn't have any mundane desires. But even the Bhagavatam could attract him. And then his name is Shukadeva. He's compared to a parrot, not because he's just saying something like, Bali, want a cracker? Or you can look online, you can see a parrot going, Hare Krishna. And you can actually see that. Parrots will just, whatever they hear, and there's some birds that whatever they hear, they can make an exact representation. There's this one bird that apparently the previous day there must have been this big machine cutting down a forest, because it just makes this noise just like a chainsaw, it's just making, and it's a really weird representation. But so Shukadeva's not called a parrot because he can just exactly say something like a parrot can. They can imitate someone's voice, they can imitate some sound, and that's kind of absurd inquiries or useless following. It doesn't do much. It's better than nothing, It's kind of like the holy name. The holy name also has that aspect. You can just chant the alphabets of the holy name. There's, Hare, Hare Krishna. It has sounds, but if it's not connected in the right way, it won't produce the effect that it's meant to produce. Or it'll take 300 lifetimes to produce the proper effect. And which necessarily means that the consciousness behind it, the attitude behind it will change to that proper attitude. If the improper attitude is there, it'll never fructify. Even after chanting Bahunam Ante, I forget the verse. in the CC when it's describing the different offenses. If you chant for hundreds of lifetimes, you'll never get the fruit, the love of Godhead. So you have to chant it without offenses. So what this verse is describing, Shukadeva Goswami, he's a parrot because parrots, another interesting quality of parrots is that they can sense where the sweetest fruit is. Like there's these monkeys that they'll steal jackfruit, or they'll like pick jackfruit, but they're not sure which jackfruit is ripe, so they'll wait until another animal who's like more perceptive can like find the right one, and then they'll kick that animal away and then take the jackfruit. So similarly, parrots, they know which mango or which fruit is the sweet one, and if you go and you eat that sweet mango, if you find a mango which is bit by a parrot, you know that's the sweetest one, because the parrots only go to the sweet ones. They don't go to the bitter ones. They don't go to the ones that are, So, similarly, as the Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam went to Vyasadeva, to Shukadeva, to Sutta Goswami, and down the line, it's like the sweetness of it somehow increases. The sweet parts are brought out more and more, and like that, the cyclic succession is like this focus lens, which is continuously bringing, the supreme sweetness of Krishna consciousness, of serving Krishna, of Radha and Krishna, more and more into focus for those lower entities which wouldn't otherwise be able to taste it. Like all of us wouldn't be here. Bhaktisiddhanta couldn't make it to the West. He wanted to go to America and preach there for 10 years. He said that himself. But he couldn't. So Prabhupada brought it there and brought the sweetness of the Bhagavatam in such a way, old wine in a new bottle, that those people could understand it. And that was his expertise. And I'm even personally kind of experiencing this. There's this book I've been studying called the Gita Shubodhini. And it's, we have, Prabhupada presented Bhagavad Gita as it is. And like I said, when I first read it, nothing much understood from it. And Prabhupada, he mainly consulted Baladev Vijayabhushana's commentary. He dedicates his Gita as it is to Baladev Vijayabhushan. And but then there's one of his disciples, Borijan Prabhu. Prabhupada actually told him, Gita is your book, you study the Gita. And so he did. He studied every day for years and years and years and years. And he studied along with that. He studied Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary and Baladev Vijayabhushan's commentary. And he made a book which was his fruit of his study to try to more deeply understand and bring the sweetness of the Gita to light so we could understand it. And so he has a book called Surrender to Me. And so I've read that book. And then now this book, Gita Shobonini, is made by a Prabhu named Gaurāṅga Darshan. And he took Burijan's book, he took Prabhupada's as it is, he took the other commentaries, and he also brought even more things to light and made it more obvious and easy to understand. And so that's one way that the cyclic succession can make things sweeter. In this terms, sweetness is the ability for more people to relish. Like we're trying to bring the holy name. Prabhupada brought the holy name from Vrindavan to the West, and his disciples and his grand disciples somehow brought it to us. And so we then also have the ability, if we so choose, to bring it to others who wouldn't have the opportunity to get it from, there's only some people got it from Prabhupada, but not everyone. And their disciples also gave it to some people, but not everyone. And like this, it's continuously going down. Like Mahaprabhu is saying, how many fruits alone can I relish? Take whatever you can take and then distribute the rest. So that's what our preaching is. It's whatever sweetness that we've gotten from our gurus, our spiritual masters, our different teachers, what they've brought to light in us, that can enthuse us, and then we can bring that to others. And so that's what we should do. That's what the Yuga Dharma is. That's the essence of everything is, Krishna Nam, what is it? Jiva Doya Krishna Nam Sarva Dharma Sar. So, relishing Krishna's name, which means not only chanting, but it necessarily means hearing. You have to, before chanting Krishna's name, someone at least has to tell you, can you say Hare Krishna? At least that. Like, they have to say something. You have to hear something. And even deeper, it goes to hearing the Bhagavatam. It goes to hearing from devotees. And that hearing the Bhagavatam will give us the proper consciousness, the proper enthusiasm, the proper mood to be able to actually chant with potency. And then we can do Shravanam. Then our Kirtanam will actually be able to give mercy to the fallen conditioned souls. And we'll be able to spread the sweetness of Krishna everywhere more and more. And our goal shouldn't be just to end there. It should be to make, Prabhupada's goal wasn't just to tell people about Krishna. It was to turn them into people that would tell people about Krishna, or turn them into people who would turn people into people telling people about Krishna. Our goal shouldn't necessarily just to be ourselves chanting the holy name. It should be to chant the holy name in such a way that people want to get to chant the holy name, or that they want to tell others to chant the holy name. Or distributing books, we also want to distribute book distributors, and like that, it can be the never-ending, increasing ocean of transcendental bliss. Like in the verse, your words are pleasing to our minds. Tu shanti cha ramanti cha. So everyone's looking for bliss. So that's the ultimate solution to our problem of bliss. It's very simple, but very sublime at the same time. And so at this time, I would like to request the senior devotees to give their transcendental realizations. Or any AD devotees to ask a question or make a comment.
I just listened to that story of the devotee asking if you explain technology in the Vedas. And it was one of the devotees from the newly formed library party under Saswati Maharaj's guidance. And it was when Prabhupada visited to Chicago in the summer of 1974. The library party had just formed very recently. And the question was asked to Prabhupada, we're going to these professors and they're asking us about Vedic technology is found in the Vedas, and some book had just come out called Chariot of the Gods. And this book at that time described, flying spaceships and all kinds of things like that. And Prabhupada, without even missing a beat, before he even completely finished all the words coming out of his mouth to ask the question, he wrapped his knuckles on the table and said, Vedic technology means Shri Guru Parampara. And the devotee meditating on that over years is giving his realization that now this technology is spread all over materialistic technology is spread all over the planet by the influence of the age. And in former ages, all the technology and all of everything in human society was manifest strictly by following the authorized Guru Parampara. So his realization was that if we follow Shri Guru Parampara, the Vedic technology on all levels will come back. Very nice realization. Also at the same time, you were mentioning Prabhupada's, the devotee couldn't understand Prabhupada's Bengali pronunciation. So Rukmini was also in Chicago with her husband at the time, Bharadwaj. And Bharadwaj asked the question, I think maybe, how to paint a painting, I forget exactly, but it said, but Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya had long hair. I said, yes. Lord Chaitanya was a hippie, and he has come to shave. You identify with Lord Chaitanya because he had long hair, so we're all hippies and we should follow the greatest hippie, Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada, it's not so much a question, but I understand the mentality. But then he could also understand that the devotees thought him saying save because there's a
Double entendre. Anyone have any challenging question? Or just a submissive inquiry?
Not a challenge, but when I first went to New Zealand, I spent quite a lot of time on the North Island, and then the first time I went down to the South Island, they had a temple in Christchurch, and that temple had a parrot, and that parrot would go, "Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna." You put an extra Krishna, and they would, "Hey, Prabhupada, Prabhupada." It was really hilarious to hear this bird say this over and over again, And I always wondered whether the bird got any benefit from any of that, But, it was kind of interesting that the devotees taught the bird how to say those things.
Yeah, definitely the bird got some benefit in the 6th canto and in Harinam Chintamani. There's, even if you say something jokingly or unknowingly, you get so much benefit. It's not Shrudanam, it's not going to give you Krishna Prema, but definitely the bird will get a really good birth, not as an animal, definitely at least in a good human birth.
We have here
Jharkhanda.
getting all the forest animals of Jharkhand to chant, not like parrots, but to chant in ecstasy, like completely wonderstruck, astonished.
Govinda.
Just unbelievable.
The deer and the tiger embracing. Pashupaki joy.
They're so great that they make birds and beasts fly.
Yeah.
So
Vidana.
we not on that level, so we should at least try to get human beings to do.
Yeah.
So of course, everything in this material world is a perverted reflection of the perfection and spiritual variegatedness. So it's nice to keep in mind that who is Shukadeva Goswami ultimately. He is Śrīmati Radharani's favorite pet parrot, and in the same Govinda Lilamrita, the same Krishna Dāsa Goswami, which by the way was manifest first literature before the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and that just more or less unanimously wowed the Vaishnava community, and he was thrust and elected and urged to render the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which you see has many quotes from Sri Govinda Lilamrita in it. And there's, I believe it's chapter 8, the parrot's prayers, where the very famous Sri Shuka Savastari, there's two, the Radharani's parrot and Krishna's parrot, and glorifying the qualities of each. Very, very nice. So, being anything in any form of life for Radha and Krishna and below the Vrindavan, you're on the topmost supreme perfection, philosophy, science, knowledge, intelligence, everything.
Recently heard that even the Shanta Ras in Vrindavan is more exalted than the Madhurya Ras anywhere else, because like the Uddhava is glorified as the most exalted devotee in Dwarka, but he desires even to be a blade of grass in Vrindavan.
Yeah, you can, there's many exalted, astonishing statements like that, particularly proponent on the Saraswati Prabhupada.
Yeah.
I'd rather be born as a pig even in Vrindavan than even be a queen of Dwarka.
Krishna Kripa Prabhu.
There's a story, there's a section of the Purana called Gita Mahatmya, and it's a story about somebody who attained perfection by reciting each of the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. And the Guru Maharaj has told many of those stories in Bhagavatam class. I was somehow or other, I think maybe it was on a Gita Jayanti day, I got involved in reading chapter 1, and it involves a parrot. And basically, the abbreviated version of the story, which is very long, is this Brahmana is very impious, and he takes birth as a bull. And this bull is being abused like anything, so bad that people feel sorry for it. So somebody donates their pious activities toward the bull's upliftment. And this prostitute hears about it, and she thinks, I don't think I've done anything pious in my life, but if I have, I donate that for the bull. So it turns out that the bull, so he dies and he comes before Yamaraj, and he's to be promoted back to his previous status as a Brahmana. And he asked Yamaraj, how is it that I became relieved from that sin? And it was because of the prostitute's pious activities. And it turned out the prostitute had a parrot that used to live in an ashram and had memorized the entire chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita. So she became so pious hearing this parrot recite that her pious activities brought the Brahman. So I guess he tracked down this prostitute and found out about this. And the end of the story is that all three of them, the Brahmana, the prostitute, and the parrot, went back to Godhead.
Wow.
By the grace of chapter 1 of Bhagavatam.
Wow.
So you can have parrots attain perfection now.
Yeah.
Now the Gita Mahatmya, it describes that you can go back home, back to Godhead by remembering the Bhagavad Gita, or even remembering one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, or even remembering one verse of the Bhagavad Gita, or even remembering half a verse of the Bhagavad Gita. And then it gives a story about this Rakshasa, this male and female Rakshasis, that one was, they were traveling somewhere and they were in terrible distress, and they stopped under a tree. And the female Rakshasi asked actually Brahma Rakshasi, they had both been Brahmanas and now they were kind of semi-ghosts as Rakshasas. And she asked him, what is actually the first line of the, I think it's the 7th chapter or something like that of Bhagavad Gita, what is Brahma and what is, she was just... 8th chapter, what is Brahma and what is... Kim Brahma, Kim...
Adhyatma, Kim Karma.
And just by saying that, they were instantly liberated, and they wondered what had happened, and she just happened to paraphrase the half the verse. She didn't. So even half a verse can deliver you from.
It reminds me of even like if you somehow say the syllables of the holy name and they're separated by either your not knowing what they mean, or just by the syllables even being separated, even that will have some potency there. Harinam Chintamani. Okay. Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Radha Govinda ki jai.